So greetings to your beautiful morning sit time. I hope that many of you sit more than just this morning sit, where it's guided and conversational, interactive, that you take time for yourself to really have your own sitting practice, taking the time to be present and look within without input from somebody else. And I just want to welcome each of you and all of your identities and various dimensions of beingness in this life, in this time. We come together of various ages and ethnicities and socioeconomic groups and gender identity, sexual orientation, religious background, abilities, and I don't know if anybody knows this. It's not that publicized that I've noticed, but this month is actually Disability Pride Month, and it coincides with the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it was signed into law on July 26th in 1990. And so in Chicago, the 21st Annual Disabilities Pride Parade takes place this Saturday to promote belief in society that disability is a natural and beautiful part of human diversity. And so I saw something in my email box this morning from NPR wanting to know, what do you wish other people knew about living with a disability? And they want people to share their stories, and it might be featured in their Up First newsletter on July 26th. So I thought that that was a great thing to come into my mailbox today. All of the diversities that come together, and many we don't know. Many of our disabilities are unseen. And if I can find it, I'll put it in the chat later. There was a link to a video about talking with people with disabilities, sort of how to talk to people with disabilities. So I hope I can find it, knowing about it and talking. It was called Want to Be a Better Ally to Disabled People, Here's How. And it was just printed July 10th, just last week. So as we gather together and we include all beings, and we also can be appreciative and thankful for those who went before us, people of Asian descent who brought the teachings to the United States, as well as recognizing and honoring the indigenous peoples in this region, the Willamette, the Multnomah, the Tualatin, dozens of tribes and bands that today make up a part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, and the Cowlitz and the Siletz that made their homes along the Willamette and Columbia rivers and up into the Cascades. 11,000 years. So as we recognize that our communities, some of us aren't here in Portland, have many diverse Native peoples, and we can recognize and realize that they work and live here, and we respectfully acknowledge and honor all the communities, past, present, and future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. And so laying this foundation of gratitude for all those who have come before us, appreciation to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the basis of our practice, that we might find our seat in this support and stability of others, knowing that we aren't alone in our practice, and for thousands and thousands of years, people have been listening to the teachings of the Buddha and practicing and seeing for themselves the nature of existence. So as I ring the bowl here, we invite the sound to come to the ears. Noticing the beginning, middle, and end of sound. As it arrives to the ears. As we settle, noticing gravity being held within our bodies, we can feel the earth under our feet. We can feel the chair under our buttocks. We can feel where our arms and hands touch, or maybe where our lips touch. If our eyes are gently closed, we can notice the eyelids. There are many touch points throughout the body that give us a return, an anchor. When the mind gets a little lost or confused out there doing all of its thinking that serves us so well at certain times. We can let ourselves return to the body and settle with the touch point, or settle noticing the breath. As we set a foundation of kindness, appreciation, and gratitude, I'll chant, and you can chant along with me if you want to, the 3 homages. Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranam gacchami, Dhanang saranam gacchami, Sanghang saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhanang saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhanang saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranam gacchami. Realizing that this going for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha can give us stability in our practice, knowing that it has been happening for thousands of years. And as we settle, the moment that we're doing our practice, we're actually profiting from it. We're just recognizing and accepting what's happening. Is it okay? And as we use this body and this breath as an anchor to return to a single object at first, that can help us calm the body, calm the mind, and return to the present moment. And in our practice, this constant returning to the present moment and being interested, having curiosity, having confidence as mindfulness is present. Each time we return to this moment, mindfulness is present and awareness is there. And we are able to see more deeply into the three characteristics of existence: anicca, anatta, and dukkha. Now, what's the point of that? Well, if we can actually see clearly for a moment that what arises can't be held onto. It has a life of its own. Conditions are coming together. They arise at a certain point. If we have mindfulness and awareness there, we can see perhaps that they last for a certain amount of time and then they pass away on their own without our control. No matter how hard we might want to control things, push away what isn't pleasant or grasp at what is pleasant, we can see directly into the nature of impermanence with mindful awareness. And why do we want to do that? Well, it can really help us see that there's no solid sense of self. We can't grasp on. And so things are constantly arising and passing, arising and passing. And we're honing our hearts and minds. We're training the mind. We're taming the mind from being wild and crazy all over the place to just coming to this single point of the breath and waking up at whatever moment we can to see clearly this nature of impermanence, because we can also see that third characteristic, the dukkha nature, that if we try to grasp or cling to something that's arising, whether it's a sensation in the body or in the heart-mind, we might notice the subtle attachments of clinging and craving, which is the subtle cause of our suffering. And by seeing clearly and letting go of grasping and clinging, we have a moment of freedom. And so we hold ourselves in this practice in kindness and in compassion. As we open with the neutrality of mindfulness and the presence of awareness to train and tame the mind to be present, and to really see clearly that thoughts that are happening in the mind are just thoughts that arise at the thought door. And we have the other sense doors as well, of hearing, sound coming to the ear like the bell. Seeing, if our eyes are closed, we have internal seeing. If we're in our daily lives, we have external seeing. Tasting, smelling, and touching. Touching is one of the most solid reminders that we can return to as our feet touch the ground and buttock sits on the chair, or if we're standing practice or walking practice, we can feel our body move through space. We can feel ourselves standing on the earth. It's a natural progression. We're just here in an open spaciousness to return to the breath if we get lost, and to let ourselves be attentive to what comes to each of the sense doors. And not controlling the experience. It's just experience, and it's nature. It's a natural experience arising. Whether we perceive it as good or bad, it can all be interesting to the investigating mind. Settling in the body, settling in the breath, being present for what's arising in this moment. Oftentimes, once we settle, we may not really notice that some of the hindrances have snuck in. Maybe the first easiest one to notice, one of my favorites that visits me often, is sleepiness, tiredness, dullness in the mind. And just by opening our eyes gently and letting light in, or standing in place, is a way to keep interested in what's happening. Or maybe you have a very active mind and there's lots of thinking going on, restlessness. Sometimes we can just stop for a moment and go back to the breath and just take another big breath, an energetic breath. Just allow the body to come back together again with the heart and mind and be present. Or we may find ourselves grasping at something that seems to be pleasant, or pushing away something that might not be very pleasant. Just noticing these hindrances. Sometimes there's doubt in the practice. Am I doing it right? Why am I doing this anyway? These hindrances come around in cycles at different times, and sometimes by using one of the 5 faculties of faith or confidence in the practice, as we're noticing mindfulness moment by moment, continuity of awareness, it can bring confidence in the practice. Or there may be just a little bit of effort that's needed, right effort, to have interest. That right effort might be opening the eyes or taking that extra breath. We're developing over and over again that central focus of mindfulness. And of the 5 factors, it's the glue that helps balance the other 4. And there's also right concentration, the concentration that's being developed as we return again to the breath, or we return to changing objects that arise in the mind, but our attention goes to it. We hold it, we touch it, we're aware of what's happening, and we see it pass away. Mindfulness arises, awareness is present, wisdom arises to see whether what we're attending to is skillful or whether we can let it go and incline toward the skillful. These thoughts of faith and effort and mindfulness, concentration and wisdom. Wisdom arises. So we can incline the mind when we find ourselves roaming off. We can incline the mind toward the Dhamma. We can remember these 5 faculties, or we can remember the Brahma Viharas of loving kindness and encourage continuing to hold ourselves in well-being. And have compassion for ourselves when things seem difficult. We can notice when joy arises, and we can have sympathetic joy for others' joy. And this can be balanced with equanimity, to not let ourselves fall into extremes. Letting equanimity be the foundation that we're training our heart and mind toward. And there are the paramis. One especially good one is patience, always needed as we begin again. So we watch what arises. We stay present with seeing the characteristic of impermanence and non-personal, and that it's our grasping and clinging that might make us uncomfortable, dissatisfied, fall into these moments of suffering. And there's joy there at waking up in this very moment over and over again. Breath by breath, we return to this moment. Beginning again, if we found ourselves confused or lost, spacing out or spacing in. We may come back to the breath, or we may come back to a more open awareness of what is arising and coming to any of the sense doors. Holding this cauldron of our bodies and stability of the practice. Curious about what's happening next. As we slowly let go of what we cling to over and over again. As it's said in the Atadhananda Sutta, which is of the Sutta Nipata, that we are disarming ourselves. One of my favorite sutta selections, it's called The Thorn in Your Heart. And it's been translated by a few people. Thanissaro Bhikkhu always has a good translation. But I thought I would share it with you this morning, this translation by Andrew Olodensky, who's a professor and director of mindfulness studies program, and he's a scholar of early Buddhist thought and practice with a special interest in Buddhist psychology and its relevance in the modern world. And he's currently a professor at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the director of its mindfulness studies program, which is actually currently the only program that offers a master's degree in the field of integrated mindfulness theory and practice. And he's been involved in the Dharma for many years, traveled to Asia, immersed himself in practice and study. And so this Atadhananda Sutta comes from the Sutta Nipata. Fear is born from arming oneself. Just see how many people fight. I'll tell you about the dreadful fear that caused me to shake all over, seeing creatures flopping around like fish in water, too shallow, so hostile to one another. Seeing this, and this is the Buddha's words, seeing this, I became afraid. This world completely lacks essence. It trembles in all directions. I longed to find myself a place unscathed, but I could not see it. Seeing people locked in conflict, I became completely distraught. But then I discerned here a thorn, hard to see, lodged deep in the heart. It's only when pierced by this thorn that one runs in all directions. So if that thorn is taken out, one does not run and settles down. Who here has crossed over desires, the world's bond, so hard to get past? One does not grieve, one does not mourn, one's stream is cut. All unbound. What went before, let go of that. All that's to come, have none of it. Don't hold on to what's in between. And you'll wander fully at peace, for whom there is no I-making, all throughout the body and mind, and who grieves not for what is not, is undefeated in the world, for whom there is no this is mine, nor anything like that is theirs, not even finding selfness. One does not grieve at I have nothing. And this sutta, the Sutta Nipata, is probably one of the most diverse collection of discourses that's found in the set of discourses called the Tipitaka. And the chapter that this sutta is taken from, the Atthakkhana is probably the oldest portion of the entire canon. And it's composed mostly in verse, and it includes something like this, which is more like poetry. And I think what's particularly moving is about this poem is it's composed in the first person, and it appears to reveal the process through which the Buddha himself came to understanding. And maybe because of the vulnerability that's expressed in those open stanzas where he admits his fear and sense of dread over the nature of the human condition. Or maybe it's the simplicity of first the problem, people hurting each other, and then its cause, basic human selfishness driven by desire. And then there's the solution of letting go of attachments. Of course, he seems to make it sound easy. But, we have to ask ourselves, do we really feel more safe when we lash out at our critics or our adversaries? And our culture certainly seems so, especially these days. But the Buddha's offering this alternative response, emerging from his own experience. And that phrase translated here as arming oneself, which sort of serves as the title of the sutta, embracing violence or violent conduct. The image of a person taking up a stick, and it's a common symbol in Indian literature for both violence and punishment. And so just that feeling of being swept up in the emotional turmoil of the Buddha. And then the whole second half of how to cultivate a state of mind and a stance within unfolding experience. That avoids the dysfunctional move of creating and projecting ourselves on every situation. And so it really embraces the whole Four Noble Truths. Suffering manifest as violence. It's caused by this thorn in the heart, and the unbinding or crossing over is the way to cultivate the selflessness that really makes up real freedom. So as we go about our day, may we touch upon when we grasp and how it feels, and when we can let go, and how those moments of freedom are so rewarding. Anicca vata sankhara upadavaya domino upakita wa meruchanti te samvapasamo sukho. All conditioned things are subject to impermanence. They arise and pass away, and we see this clearly with mindfulness. And when we do see this clearly, moments at a time, having these moments of continuity of practice, that's what brings us peace. Thank you so much for your practice.